Good morning. My name is Kim Ritter, and I'm doing the literatus today on Ephesians 4:14 through 21. No prolonged emphases among us. Please, we will not tolerate babes in the woods, small children who are easy prey for predators. God wants us to grow up to know the whole truth and tell it in love, like Christ in everything. We take our lead from Christ, who is the source of everything we do. He keeps us in step with each other. His very breath and blood flow through us, nourishing us so that we will grow up healthy in God, robust in love. And so I insist, and God backs me up on this, that there be no going along with the crowd. The empty-headed, mindless crowd they've refused for so long to deal with God that they've lost touch not only with God, but with reality itself. They can't think straight anymore. Feeling no pain, they let themselves go in sexual obsession, addicted to every sort of perversion. But that's no life for you. You learned Christ. My assumption is that you have paid carefully attention to Him, been well instructed in the truth, precisely as we have it in Jesus. Since then, we do not have the excuse of ignorance. Everything, and I do mean everything, connected with that old way of life has to go. It's rotten through and through. Get rid of it and then take on an entirely new way of life, a God-fashioned life, a life renewed from the inside and working itself into conduct as God accurately reproduces His character in you. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Our passage today comes from the book of Ephesians, which you may or may not know is actually not a book, but a letter, or formally called an epistle. And it's normally attributed to the Apostle Paul, though scholarship in the mid-1900s said actually it's probably Deutero-Pauline, which means a disciple or an apostle of Paul's. Another church pastor, planter, founder wrote the letter to the church in Ephesus, and they put Paul's name on it, which in the 21st century is plagiarism or scandalous or falsification or something awful, and in the biblical times was protocol. You put the name of the person who already had street cred, the person who already had the credentials. That was normative, and so we shouldn't be scandalized by it. And actually, it's not even atypical to say Paul wrote Ephesians, even when you know Paul didn't actually write Ephesians. Paul says it's sort of all mixed in there. And for our purposes today, it doesn't really matter. But I just want you to know we're in this letter, which is often attributed to Paul. And it is a letter written by a pastor to a church trying to help church people through their struggles and their disagreements. We read those types of letters, that type of biblical literature, different than we might read the narratives or the stories of the Gospels, differently than we would read the Psalms, differently than we might read Genesis or Exodus, or if we were to dare to read it, Leviticus. Right? They're different classes of liturgy, so we give them sort of different levels of credence. But here we have an epistle, a letter to the church which is struggling. It's normal for churches to struggle. It's not a secret, even in the first century. And one of the challenges that we have anytime we come to an epistle is that we have the letter the pastor sent to the church. It's a reply. We don't ever have what was sent from the church. Basically, the churches were struggling about something, about Jews versus Greeks, about circumcision or not circumcision, about this kind of food or that kind of food, any of those kind of details that were part of the struggle, the particulars of how we go about doing this faith thing when we're different people with different cultures and different values. So the church says, hey, pastor, who's not here week in and week out, we need your help. We've got these problems. And then the pastor writes a letter and says, well, here's how I would suggest you work those things out. We don't have the first, we just have the response, which leaves us a little bit reading between the lines, finding some inferences, some assumptions about what the question might have been, what the issue might have been. And so we read this letter, and in Ephesians, there's a number of things that Paul's disciple wrote and addresses. And here in today's section is sort of a generalized summary of pay attention to these things. It's advice that could easily find its place in any church. It might sound similarly like this. Y'all have been arguing about X, Y, and Z. I've offered my best wisdom in finding a path forward, but at the end of the day, please remember these things. Don't be childish or petty. Focus on the gospel. Do your best to live like Jesus. Don't give in to foolishness. Don't do what is popular just because it's popular. Do what is Christ-like. Jesus came to give you a new life. He came to change the world through us. That can't happen if we refuse to follow his example. So, take on a God-fashioned way of life, one that reflects God in you. We can hear that advice pretty well. It's pretty standard, pretty par for the course. Don't act like an idiot. Don't be a jerk. Practice the way of Christ. Be compassionate, be patient, be gentle, be merciful, be forgiving. That's all good advice. And in this passage, there's a line that sort of catches me as funny. Now, granted, we're reading the Message translation, which is the more colloquial of what we find. It's not the very strict or old King James Version. It's not the NIV or NRSV that we might recommend for sort of deep study, but it's that which is approachable. And in that approachable way, it says, and so I insist, and God backs me up on this, that there be no going along with the crowd, the empty-headed, mindless crowd. And the first part that tickles me, and God backs me up on this. I'm telling y'all how to live. I'm telling you how to do church. I'm telling you how to be better. And for the record, God's on my side, not yours. Right? I just sort of love the audacity of the claim. And not that God would argue against what he's saying here, but just sort of this big, bold thing. You might doubt me, but you aren't doubting God, and I've got God, so let's move on. And then he says, don't go along with the crowd, the empty-headed, mindless crowd. Now, we don't have all the particulars of what that meant for the church in the first century. We could get at a few things, and I'm sure that for us in the 21st century, we could share our own ideas about who exactly are the empty-headed, mindless ones. Right? You have your opinions. I know you do. But that's not our task for today. We aren't going to sling mud or throw stones. And in truth and honesty, I'm sure we have a good spread of folks here. right? We have folks who vote red and those who vote blue. We have folks who watch CNN, those who watch Fox News, those who watch the BBC, some who go to the Daily Show for their news updates. And I don't want us overgeneralizing about who is more right or who is more wrong. I think that practice in and of itself is in line with this pastor's caution. And experience tells me that if we don't get into that debate, we can begin to think we're pretty okay in the church. We don't really need this part of the letter. We aren't prone to empty-headed ridiculousness. Not I, surely not you, but truth be told, church people are still people. Try as we might, we can still fall into childishness. And to give us a taste, I asked some colleagues, what is the most trivial, ridiculous, or absurd thing you've seen church folks fight over? I will tell you it took them no time to create quite a list. I want to share it with you so that you're aware of just how human church folks can be. Good, Christian, faithful people can fall into this trap of foolishness. And it's not just an incidental thing. These things are more than just a line on a page. In those churches, in those days, those were big deals. Let me share just a few. First, whether the meat in the UMW stew should be chunky or shredded. In one church, the choir boycotted Christmas Eve because the pastor asked them to practice their Christmas music. The choir believed they were too good to need to practice, and they were offended at the request. In a church, a choir refused to sing on Christmas morning because it was the children's pageant, and they were above that. In one church, it was a big deal on whether they gave mothers carnations or roses on Mother's Day. In one church, someone didn't like the pastor's jacket. In one church, I think this might be my favorite one. In one church, someone left a tea towel on the counter in the kitchen. That was it. And it was a problem. And they tried to figure out just who had done this thing. And they could not find the culprit. So in the middle of the Sunday worship service, they came and got the pastor and called her out and down to the kitchen to ask if she was a responsible party. These things matter, y'all. All right? Other churches argue about the color of the kitchen cabinets in the church, in the parsonage, about the color of the wall, the color of the carpet, where pictures should be hung, how much the bulletin paper should weigh. One church got very upset after a fellowship meal when there were 6 people washing the dishes and their pastor was not among them. She got a 90-minute lecture. You might ask where she was, what frivolous, unnecessary things she was doing instead of washing dishes. And what she was doing was that in their church, the fellowship hall was downstairs and they didn't have an elevator, which made it inaccessible for some of their members. And so for those that she could, who had wanted to participate in the meal but needed to get back upstairs to be able to leave, she physically carried them up the stairs. That's what she was doing instead of washing dishes, which was inappropriate in and of itself. Doubly so because that's men's work and not her job. Other churches have quarreled about the proper way to take out the trash, the name for the church newsletter, how to set the table, the cost of postage stamps. I love that. The proper way to cut a cake, the brightness of the light bulbs in the sanctuary, painting the vanity in the women's bathroom, whether they should have a wine and cheese event or a big roast event. Wine, there you go. came from Pastor Michael, so it shall be. One church was very perturbed at where the pastor wore her ponytail. They had very clear instructions for where she would wear it so she would be less distracting. And one who was taken to task with her district superintendent and elevated to the bishop because she wore dangly earrings. My friends, church people are people too. Okay? These are not just disagreements. They are not just simple things, though from the outside we can look at them as absolutely asinine. But these are things that made the list because they took time and energy. They made the list because the pastor had to mediate conversations, spend time following up, work on forgiveness and reconciliation, and probably reminding themselves why they do ministry in the first place. The good news is we are not here. Not that we have never been here, not that we can't go down that slippery slope in very short order if something comes up, but the FUMC that I have known has been healthy. And so this conversation is more like going to couples counseling when you're healthy than when you're in crisis. Anybody ever gone to couples counseling? We've done it under pretty much every circumstances. I highly advocate for it. It's good for you. It's often a lot easier when you're in a good place because then you can deal with your stuff without it being a big thing. But because when you're in crisis, everything is a thing and everything hurts and every word just feels like another prick and another stab and another jab, and it's hard and it's necessary, but it's hard to get through counseling that way. If we were in crisis as a church, y'all would hate this conversation. You would be so mad and you would know that I was talking about you. That's not where we are. We're in a good place. I may be crazy, but I'm not crazy enough to air all of our dirty laundry on New Member Sunday. All right. Today, we are welcoming new members. Today, we are reminding ourselves of who we are as a church. Today, we are claiming Jesus, renouncing our sin, claiming our power to live faithfully following God, and covenanting to our community relationships here at First United Methodist Church. And as we do that, we should remember that there will be countless decisions for us to make as a church, including colors of paint and tablecloths, including types of worship music, including ways to outreach, including ways to make a significant difference in our community. Some decisions will require a lot of conversation, and some have absolutely no bearing on the gospel or the life of the church. And I have no doubt that the beloved souls that were part of these moments that my colleagues reported really thought they were dealing with something that mattered. They wouldn't have given time and attention to it if it didn't. In those moments, those things mattered. And so when we get tied up like that, we also have to have the self-reflection and self-awareness to take a step back, to see what is ours and what's really for the church, in the best interest of the church. To remember to think about our words, to speak with kindness and compassion, to look from the other person's perspective and assume the best of them and their intentions. That's part of living like Jesus and having responsibility as church. So I'll repeat my paraphrased words of the epistle writer for us. Please, church, remember this. Don't be childish or petty. Focus on the gospel. Do your best to live like Jesus. Don't give in to foolishness. Don't do what is popular just because it's popular. Do what is Christ-like. Jesus came to give you new life. He came to change the world through us. That can't happen if we refuse to follow his example. So take on a God-fashioned way of life, one that reflects God in you. May it be so. Amen.